Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to discuss Jane Austen's novel, Sense and Sensibility. More specifically, I want to discuss the character Marianne Dashwood's infatuation with Willoughby. I want to talk about what may have been going on with her psychologically at the time, and why I don't think Jane Austen was completely fair to her. But before we start talking about any characters at all, let's first discuss the novel itself and what Jane Austen's central message in the novel was. Sense and Sensibility was the first novel that Jane Austen ever published. She published it anonymously in 1811. And for anyone out there like myself who has read all 6 of her major works, then you'll know it to be the most moralistic, the most didactic of all of her novels. The 2 main characters of Sense and Sensibility are the Dashwood sisters, or at least the eldest 2 Dashwood sisters, Eleanor and Marianne. There is a 3rd Dashwood sister, her name is Margaret, but she's quite young when this book opens, and she doesn't play all that large of a role in the story, so I'm not going to be talking about her all that much, but just know she does exist. But the 2 Dashwood sisters, the 2 eldest Dashwood sisters, have love interests who come into their lives that they're drawn to, but with whom they face complications, and therefore forming the plot of this novel, the 2 different stories of these 2 Dashwood sisters. For Eleanor, her love interest is Edward Ferrars, who is the brother of their sister-in-law, so he's connected to the family, but he's not a blood relation. And then for Marianne, the man that she is interested in is named John Willoughby. In this novel, we see the sisters behave very differently from one another. They do share some things in common. They are sisters after all, and their mother did raise them right. But it seems that they just approach the world differently and the way they handle themselves differently. Eleanor is very mature. She is patient. She's level-headed. She's self-sacrificing when she needs to be. She has a focus on duty. She's very poised. All that to say that she is pretty firmly in control of her emotions most of the time. Whereas Marianne, although she is very deep of feeling, very passionate, she can also be very hard-headed, stubborn, overly sentimental, and generally easily swept away by her emotions. We get the sense throughout this novel that Jane Austen is attempting to do 2 major things by telling the stories of these 2 women. I think the first thing she's trying to do is be critical of what was known at the time as sensibility. Nowadays, I think we would call it something more like romanticism, sentimentality, sensitivity. In essence, it was the elevation of emotion over more practical things. And Jane Austen clearly was not a fan of that, because not only does she attack sensibility, sentimentality, but she also demonstrates through the stories of these 2 characters the value of control over one's emotions, or composure, you could call it. And she does that by putting these 2 characters, Eleanor and Marianne, through very similar trials throughout this novel. They both fall in love with someone and then have to handle extreme romantic disappointment, but each of them handles it in a very disparate way. Eleanor is the picture of grace and maturity as she goes through her ordeal, whereas Marianne's excess of emotion not only gets her into more trouble to begin with, but it also exacerbates and prolongs her situation, so much so that toward the end of the book, she is near death at one point. All of which I think was intended to communicate to us as readers that Eleanor is the good one. She's the one worthy of emulation, whereas Marianne is the misguided one. She has let her emotions get the better of her, and she is someone who we can learn from if we want to avoid ending up like her. When I read this novel for the first time, that's the message I got, loud and clear. And to be honest with you, it went down very easily, because I'm a more logical person myself, so I agreed with Jane Austen. There was also the fact that I really liked the character of Eleanor, whereas I found Marianne to be very annoying. So I just kind of accepted what she was trying to teach us as readers. But after having just finished my first reread of this book, it's the first time I've picked up this book in the 8 years that have passed since my first reading of it, I saw Marianne with fresh eyes. I'm a little bit older now, I have a different perspective, and now I believe that it wasn't entirely fair for Jane Austen to paint Marianne as this negative example, someone we should try to avoid being, because I think it's very likely that Marianne was going through a psychological phenomenon that wouldn't have had a name in Jane Austen's day. It doesn't mean that she wouldn't have been going through it, but that psychological phenomenon would have impeded Marianne's ability to think clearly. But before I get into that discussion, I did just very briefly want to mention that all of my observations, all of my opinions in this video have come from a very recent and very close rereading of Sense and Sensibility, and not just any edition, but the Annotated edition, which contains so much additional information, so many things that will allow you to understand the novel better. If you've never picked up one of these annotated editions of Jane Austen's novels and you're a Jane Austen fan, I cannot recommend them highly enough. I think they are absolutely invaluable for us modern readers to fully understand the world of Jane Austen. But I also wanted to say that throughout this video, you will notice that I am talking about Jane Austen's characters as though they are real people. Jane Austen was not writing science fiction. She was modeling her characters off of real human beings, going through real human experiences, and she did a spectacular job of it. So you'll notice that I am going to refer to these characters as though they are real people going through real psychological things, but don't fret, don't worry that I've lost touch with reality. I am aware that these are just literary characters. So, Marianne. I think she was primed to fall as hard for Willoughby as she did because she had all of these romantic notions before even meeting him. She had these ideas, principles almost, of what she thought love should be and shouldn't be, what she wanted it to be, what she absolutely would not accept. And I think some of that was hardened when she saw her sister Eleanor fall for Edward, which I can't entirely blame her. Edward seems about as interesting as dirty dishwater, so I can't exactly blame her for not wanting someone like him. But then along comes a handsome man named Willoughby, who literally rescues her by sweeping her off her feet and then seems to embody everything she wants in a man. They are interested in the same things, like music. He's young, he's energetic. He seems to share a lot in common with her in terms of kind of saying whatever's on his mind at the time. It did not surprise me, nor do I think it ever surprised anyone, that she fell for him. And to be honest, I don't even think Jane Austen was intending to be critical of her for falling as hard for Willoughby as she did. I don't think Jane Austen in this novel is arguing against feeling emotion. I think she is arguing for the control of emotion, which Marianne obviously did not have at the time. But what Jane Austen fails to take into account is what happens inside the human brain when someone like Marianne falls as hard as she does for Willoughby. It's a completely different experience and something that I'm going to talk about as this video goes on. Certainly, by the time Hurricane Willoughby blows into town in Sense and Sensibility, we as readers and Marianne had already seen Eleanor fall for Edward, but it's a different kind of love. It's a gentler, more measured version of love that befits two more docile creatures like the two of them. It is certainly a very valid love. I don't doubt at all their affection for one another. But it's clear by the way that Marianne reacts to that whole situation that she wants something very different. So it's no surprise at all that she falls as hard for Willoughby as she does, because it's a more intense, all-consuming kind of relationship that they have, and she loses herself in it. All of a sudden, he is all she can think about. He's the only person she wants to talk to. Everything he says becomes charming to her. She's blind to any and all red flags. It's almost as though Willoughby ceases being a person and becomes a drug that she cannot get enough of. And as it turns out, there is actually now a term for what Marianne was very likely going through when she felt all of those things for Willoughby: limerence. It was coined in the 1970s by a psychologist who had done a decade's worth of research on this phenomenon that existed long before she started researching it. It's just now she gave it a name. Essentially, limerence is a heightened version of infatuation with someone else, and it involves an emotional dependence on the person they desire. The person who is experiencing limerence is preoccupied with thoughts of this other person, the person that they desire. They are always thinking about them. What are they doing? Are they thinking about me? When's the next time I can see them? They hyper focus on the way that the person is behaving, looking for any and all clues, reading into anything this person does, trying to affirm that this person that they are so obsessed with feels the same way about them, because they are terrified that this other person doesn't feel the same way about them. They have big mood swings. They absolutely overlook any flaw they see in the other person. Is any of this starting to sound a little bit like Marianne? It's love sickness. And there is research out there that suggests that when a person is going through limerence, their brain is being coated, bathed in a cocktail of hormones, making them feel euphoria, attachment to this other person, a need for this other person, much in the way they would feel if they were actually under the influence of drugs. Limerence is intense, it is all-consuming, and most critically, it is completely involuntary. The person going through it doesn't really have that much of a say in the matter because it's happening inside of their brain. They are also very resistant to any influence from anyone on the outside. In Marianne's case, that would be Eleanor or even her mother or any of her friends. And the person who is going through limerence is at the time willing to compromise themselves in a way that later on, when they're no longer under the influence of limerence, they may not be able to understand. The biggest point I'm trying to make here is that when someone is experiencing limerence, they are not thinking clearly, as Marianne obviously isn't for a good chunk of this book. She is under the influence of Willoughby, and I don't mean that to say that she's doing what he tells her to do. It's that she is so head over heels for him that she can't even see straight. There are so many examples in this book of her not acting properly, seeming to just forget herself, and sometimes she barely seems to care. Even when she does recognize that maybe she overstepped a boundary, she kind of just excuses it away. There is only one way that I think Marianne's experience of limerence differs from the traditional definition, and that's in the fact that she doesn't feel a whole lot of anxiety, at least at the start of the relationship, that he returns her affection. And that's because he very clearly demonstrates that he feels the same way. At least he is behaving as though he feels the same way. He, in no uncertain terms, hints that he wants to marry her. And all of this just serves to make matters worse. It actually exacerbates her feelings of limerence because she is positive that this man feels the same way about her. And he does really nothing to discourage it. So it just makes it a farther fall for her when he eventually does leave town, which does dampen her spirit. She's really falling to pieces over that in the novel, but she still holds on to hope far longer than I think someone else experiencing limerence would, because he did return her affection. So when he finally does reject her in a very, very harsh way, heartbroken, I don't think, is even a strong enough word to explain what she goes through. She is absolutely shattered. Let's be honest here. Eleanor never felt that way about Edward. I know she loves him. I'm not denying that at all. And she definitely goes through it in this novel. But I don't think she goes through it like Marianne goes through it. And I think that's partially the case because although these sisters have a lot in common, I think one of them is more logical. That's not to say that Eleanor doesn't have feelings, but I do believe she's more logical. I can kind of see it in her as a more logical person myself. And Marianne is more naturally emotional. And it's not to say that one is better than the other, because I don't believe that. But I'm a logical person who has surrounded myself with emotional people for most of my life. And I can tell just through talking to them that there's a whole side of the world that they experience that I do not, and vice versa. Again, I don't think one is superior. I just think they're very different. So I don't think someone like Eleanor, or even like myself, to be completely honest, could ever experience limerence in the way that Marianne does. So I think it would be foolish for me, for Eleanor, for anyone really, to say that we could understand what she's going through. I think it's just so easy for Jane Austen or any of us to say, snap out of it. Stop acting like this. Get your head on straight. Don't put all of your hopes in this man. But it is so easier said than done, especially when someone's heart is involved. And let's not forget that we're talking about a 17-year-old girl here. Marianne is only 17 years old, and she's a very emotional teenager who has all these lofty ideas about love. And then in walks this guy, and he's handsome, and he seems perfect. He's saying all the right things, and he's making you believe that he wants you back. It's just no surprise at all that she fell that hard. And once that ball gets rolling and those hormones start flowing, there is no walking it back. So in that way, I think Jane Austen was unknowingly unfair to Marianne. She couldn't have known the brain science, so we have to forgive her that. But I also think it's likely that Jane Austen never experienced limerence herself. I think she probably knew of limerence, had either seen someone go through it or heard of it in some way. Otherwise, how could she have portrayed it so incredibly accurately? But I think her portrayal of Marianne would have been a lot more generous had she ever experienced it herself. We would all like to be Eleanor and be in complete control of our emotions and just super composed all the time, but I don't know how realistic that is. It can be something we all work toward, certainly. I think she makes a good role model in that way. But I think there will come a time for all of us, even the more logical amongst us, where we become overcome by our emotions and we don't act in the way that we know is right. And so after this first reread that I have done, I can much more clearly see why people like Marianne. I think she's a lot more relatable than Eleanor is, because I think a lot of people will experience limerence, or at least will become overcome by their own emotions at least once in their life. Even though it ended in heartbreak, I think it was good that Marianne got to experience the high highs and low lows of that whole love affair with Willoughby. I think it taught her a lot about herself, how deeply she could feel. I think it taught her a lot about the world and where she can put trust, where she can't. And most importantly, I think she needed to go through that in order to be able to appreciate someone like Colonel Brandon, who she eventually ended up with. How could she appreciate his constancy and devotion if she hadn't had a taste of what she thought love was, which I think ended up being more akin to limerence. She needed to get a taste of what she thought she wanted before she could see what she actually needed. I am glad that her fling with Willoughby ended, however. I'm glad she went through it, but I'm also glad it ended because those types of relationships based in limerence often turn toxic. One or both parties have blinders on when it comes to the other person, and there are such intense, often unchecked emotions that things have a tendency to turn bad very quickly. Those firework types of relationships, they're remarkable, especially when you're going through them, but they have a tendency to fizzle out because they're not rooted in anything real. So when they do fizzle out, it's kind of for the best. Marianne is much better off with Colonel Brandon. I think everyone can agree there. And we're told that she comes to love him just as much as she ever loved Willoughby because she has such a capacity for feeling and for emotion. But again, I don't think she could have loved him as well had she not gone through the Willoughby thing first. So those were my thoughts on Marianne's situation in Sense and Sensibility. I would love to hear yours. Do you think it's plausible that Marianne would have been experiencing limerence? Have you yourself ever experienced limerence? And if so, could you find her experience relatable? I would love to hear any or all of that down in the comments section below. In the description box below, I will link the version of Sense and Sensibility that I reread, that annotated edition, in case you are interested in checking it out. I'm also going to link all of my sources down there as well. If you're on a mobile device, just tap the title of this video and that box will expand for you. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll find links to everywhere you can find me around the internet, like Goodreads and Instagram, the two places where I'm the most active, in case you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.